It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.
Gentlemen, we got Peter Lawrence with us today and Chad Juttner, the mighty Chad. Hey. And I'm Kyle Bacher. And Peter, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about a couple of things. Talking about being a leader at a client and some of the different ways and the different challenges and opportunities that come along with that.
Excellent. Now, my perception of both of you is that you've been doing this a long time, and you got leadership skills. Like, you know what you're talking about. I've been out of the game for three years, but I like to think I still know what I'm talking about, kind of. So in my day, I was kind of the only one that came in, and it was something that, like, I had expertise they didn't. I had that kind of, like, I was seen as that expert type person, whether I was or not, and was kind of the default leader of the project. But I
want to hear more about this, because Chad and I, when we go into a place, we're not like the only Java developer or the only .NET developer or AWS person. But when you've gone into a lot of these places, you're the only person that knew what the heck was going on with SharePoint, right?
Sorry, Chad. If you want to plug your ears when we say SharePoint, we can give you a heads up.
No, delighted to hear about SharePoint.
So, yeah, and that was one of the challenges was, working the project, being the leader and the BA and the PM and the developer, and the trainer and all that.
Right.
But then also one of my jobs that I felt was finding the leader that actually works there, be able to take on what I leave behind for them.
Well, yeah, you're not still at all your clients, right?
Unfortunately, yeah. No. And that, again, that's kind of the weird thing is, like, your job is to not work there anymore.
Right.
You go in and get your stuff done and hand it off, and hopefully they're running off to the races. Peter, you've had some long-term engagements where you've started out as an extra hand, but I'm thinking you've also had ones where you've kind of come in as the leader. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
What's the difference?
I mean, some of the times when you come in as sort of just a helper or whatever, you're just there to do code. And we've talked about it in the past where one of the things that you often do as a consultant is to come in and, like, hey, you got any horrible tasks that you guys are avoiding for any particular reason? And maybe I can start with those, kind of get used to the code and get up to speed. You're not the expert in the code in most of those cases, right? Like, you haven't coded in it. You don't know how to use their application. They've got people that have been there for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years doing nothing but this application. And your expertise is not this application. Your expertise is sort of programming and leadership, right?
Yeah.
So working your way up to being respected, getting used to, learning the code, understanding all the code, making suggestions, making those kinds of, finding out why they've done things and finding out, things that, well, maybe this is technical debt that we should get rid of, and making those suggestions a little bit more challenging when you start sort of as a teammate rather than somebody who's been brought in as, and this is your leader.
So, Chad, right now you're in a lead position on a project. Is that correct?
That would be accurate to say, yeah.
And you've been in this role like many times before.
Yeah, I've done this.
So, there's the walk in organically, like, lead as just a natural leader, kind of from the trenches, growing into that position or getting anointed, appointed, that kind of thing. I'm sure you've done both. When you're appointed the leader, what kind of challenges, or you get brought in as the leader, what kind of challenges do you think you face on a regular basis? And by regular, I mean across all of those projects.
That's hard to answer because they're all different. But I think the hardest thing is depending on what your role is, right? If you're brought into a project in a leadership role, and I think Peter and I, it's fair to say, are always going to be kind of the tech lead role in a lot of the places that we go.
Right.
you don't get to just focus on the technology, right? You have to focus on way more than just, hey, what's the tech stack? What is their CI/CD process? What are their rules around compliance and security and everything else? What architectural patterns do they have that we have to enforce? And more importantly, who are the people that came up with these rules that we can influence when we inevitably have to ask for exceptions or rewrite the rules, right? So in our case, often enough, I mean, unless a client has their own dedicated dev staff, right? Like I think Peter was getting at this earlier with, hey, what are the weird things that you guys have put off that you don't want to do? We get brought in a lot of the times to do like the really hard things that they don't want to do in-house. And so hard things inevitably lead to exceptions to all of the standards and all of the practices that they're used to. At least in my case, so far, that's been the case 100%. So being a leader for a tech stack, I mean, there's hundreds, thousands, millions of Java developers in the world, right? That's not a special thing anymore to know Java really well. Being a leader insofar as like knowing how to work with other folks, influence other teams to help you or bend their rules when you need them to, that's the hardest. Like it should be the hardest part of what we do. Now, It just so happens that I am almost universally adored, which is embarrassing but true. And so it lends itself to, having those conversations with people about processes, procedures that don't fit with what you're working on. And it makes it easy for me to my projects forward through non-standard channels in a way that, I think other folks new to the role might struggle with, right? Like if you're brand new to this type of role and you haven't worked with all of these constraints and all of the, like if you've been a developer on a project and you've been given stories and maybe you can kind of put horse blinders on and say, here's my story, here's what I have to code, here's what I have to do, I can get that out there. And I can pick up the next story and the next story and the next story. And I don't have to worry about all the ephemera around delivering, this whole project to a customer. Folks in the leadership roles don't get to just do a single thing at a time. We have to multitask constantly. We have to influence constantly. We have to influence in a way that other teams do what we want, and our own team actually respects us enough to do things that they wouldn't necessarily do the way that we're asking them to. They respect us enough to say like, okay, I trust Peter. This isn't that's we have a phrase on one of my projects. That's not the way I do it, but whatever, right? We need people to be able to say that repeatedly, frequently, and just trust us. And also, part of what I do when I'm trying to build a little bit of respect and trust with my team is, you work longer hours, right? You consistently work longer hours. You're available more than just what, office hours are.
Right.
And you make sure people, don't throw it in people's faces, but it helps when people see that, when they see like, hey, I'm hyper focused on the story and it's really hard. And Chad is, he left at 4 p.m. to go to happy hour. So, you lose a lot of respect doing that. Now, when I leave at 4 p.m. to go to happy hour, I just bring everybody with me. That's the other part of.
Then you can talk about the story.
Then you can talk about the story. Then you can do all the other things that, you can do all the things that you'd be doing at a desk, but at an American Legion, maybe. At a table.
Yeah.
And one of the things I learned early on is I was super fortunate. Like early on in my career, I was able to work with a lot of like really, really great technology leaders. And some of them have gone on to build like kind of semi-famous tech careers. Like I worked with this dude, Michael Nygaard, 20 years ago. And I watched how he did, his role. And now he wrote a book called Release It. It's semi-popular. It's not like Code Complete or some of the other kind of classic dev books that we've all read. But it's kind of up there.
And he's dedicated to Chad Jutner, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But like a couple of things that they always did. One of the things, I don't think it was Mike, it was another fella that I worked with. He said, man, it's simple. Just always be the guy that picks up the bar tab. Right. And that's kind of stuck with me. Seriously, like it's one of the simplest things. And I'm like, but yeah, dude, we all got jobs. We can all buy our own body. He's like, no, trust me. Just pick up the tab. Right.
Yep.
It's a simple, stupid thing you can do. even though you're working with professionals and everybody's got their own money, but like take care of your team and you'll be fine. And also pick up the tab on one of my retros. I got one of the nicest things I've seen on one of my retros recently was one of the folks on my team. I forget exactly how he phrased it, but he said something along the lines of, you never get a sense that Chad is doing Mr. Manager stuff just for the sake of being this, right?
Yeah.
Which I have seen before, like a manager that's kind of caught up in the role of being a manager. Those people are horrible to work for. Like, hey, like the kind of people that are like, I'm the manager and you should be afraid of me. You should be concerned if I want to have a talk with you. You should be like, if I call you to my office, they want you to be a little like all of that nonsense it's silliness, right? I don't care about that. And hearing folks from my team echo that, like, no, that's not what Chad is, and that's not how we like that. That's what I've kind of strived for, and to hear it repeated was.
But are there
really
things where you need to be the final decider, play the card of the like I'm the hole in the funnel?
No. I mean, not for me. I mean, I to whatever degree possible, I try to avoid that, right? Like if we can, part of what you do is you try to build consensus within the team. And if it does come to the point where you think you might have to be the final decider, don't do that. Make it seem like it was somebody else's. Like the team came to the conclusion on their own, right? Like you guide them on.
Well, because you lose like half your respect right there by going, I'm the lead. Listen to me because I have the power.
You can't be the president of the Senate, though. You can't be the ultimate tiebreaker.
Well, it's like what I was saying earlier, right? Like that's not the way I do it, but whatever, right? So sometimes when you do have to enforce some sort of, and it's usually like a client client constraint,
thing.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, we do, we have to mitigate all CVE findings of this level or higher, right? Like that's just a thing that we have to do, and most of them are like medium or higher, right? But if you're at a client that says like literally every CWE or CVE, every vulnerability that we find in the libraries that you're included have to be remediated. And you're like, okay, do I really have to go in and add 3 more libraries that are going to have their own CVEs in order to mitigate this one thing that really isn't ever going to be a problem for our project because it's an like all of these. And you have to say, yeah, I mean, it sucks, but yes, we have to do that. And then you hear, well, I mean, that's not the way I do it, but whatever. And I'm like, as you're doing it, that's great.
I mean, it's like code coverage, right? Some places are 100% code coverage, and that's not the way I would do it because there's some code that just doesn't need to have test coverage. But
yeah, and that's a thing that, I mean, I'm going through that right now is as you get closer and closer to delivery on a big project, you kind of punt a lot of these IT constraints towards the end, right? Like I just try to like go as fast as you can, right? And then okay, we're going to prod in a couple of months. What are our code coverage requirements? What are our vulnerability like remediation requirements? What are all the I's you got to dot and T's you got to cross and everything else? And we put that off to the end. Specifically because it does kind of screw with velocity early on, especially on greenfield projects. At least I put it off tight. Like obviously, as we're developing, it's not that we're going through the project and writing 0 unit tests ever, right? That's not the case at all. But as we're building a product, I tend to say like, use common sense. Right? Like you don't need to write code. You don't need to write unit tests for every getter and setter. That is dumb. Right? Test service methods, mock integrations, do all that stuff, use common sense. And at the end of the product build, we'll get to a point where we're at like probably 50% code coverage if we're being, and then if they say, hey, we need more, then okay, we'll write that unit test for a setter all over the place, left and right. Sure.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make the product any better, doesn't make anything any better, but it does fill out one of the TPS reports.
The TPS report is cleared.
There was a legendary writer for The Simpsons, and I don't remember his name. I wish I did, but he gave me not me. He wrote an article, the best advice for writing I'd ever seen, and it was start at the top of the page and just write, till you get to the bottom. Don't care about good or bad or right or wrong. Just write it, get it written. Then you can go back and, because the fun isn't in the writing, it's in the polishing.
I'm not sure I'd define that as fun.
Yeah, I don't know either, but
I think that the best product, I mean, nobody writes the final draft first.
Right. But you got to
start
get
with
it out there. You got to get stuff done, and you can't be hung up on one sentence, writing it over and over again.
Right. You got to have
Yeah.
a draft, and you got to get to the end of the
So,
story.
right. So that, I think that kind of parallels what I was talking about. So there's leading, just natural leading that people can do from any position
Sure.
they're in. And so when you go in and you're not the appointed leader, you're not the chosen one, and wearing the hat, running around policing everybody like Chad does with his I am the leader. I think I'd like to work on one of Chad's projects. So how do how do you lead in that regard without stepping on toes, usurping power? Like, what kind of things do you do to demonstrate leadership?
I mean, it's really boils down to how to be a good consultant, right? Make positive contributions to the project. Express your opinions. Chad, you were talking about, like, you don't want to be the decider, but you want to have your team have a consensus, right? Well, yeah, absolutely. And having an opinion is part of that, right? You can have an opinion, but you don't want to be the only opinion. I don't like being at sort of some sort of estimating meeting, and everybody goes, "How many points is that?" And they all look at one person, right? That person gets to decide the number of points that story is. Everybody should have, like, that's what I like about the sort of the secret playing cards and other agile things. It's like everybody gets a vote. You can if you can't defend your vote, don't vote that number, but you ought to be able to defend your vote. Sometimes question mark is an okay vote. I don't know what this is going to take.
Yeah, I've been working with my team for a while now, and it is kind of, you do see in planning we use the poker as well, and it's almost a nonsense exercise at this point, because at this point in the product build, everybody is kind of at the same point, like we all kind of know,
right.
And I mean, 75% of the times, everybody's throwing the same point total on a story.
It's beautiful, right?
It's great.
This is the best.
Yeah, but at the same time, now I could probably get a couple of guys and let other people work. I mean,
right.
Kumbaya, right? Planning is for everybody, but it's
sitting around in a song singing the same number every time. It's not necessary, right? But at the same time, you want everybody to have some input. Maybe they don't have to be there every time.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And this is, I mean, I've had this issue with Agile in the past where I'm like, the exact same process, if you worked in an Agile process for 10 years, right, on the same product or same project, I mean, some of the rituals, I would imagine, would be mind-numbingly after a handful of years, right?
Do we need to change anything that we've been doing right for the last 5 years? No? Okay.
Yeah, like, what does an Agile retro look like after 8 years, right? Like, and I've actually brought this up in previous retros on projects, is like, because prior to the STG, I had me and my buddies had our own thing, and we did Agile our way, and it was wonderful and beautiful, and I'll sing the praises of that again a few more times in different episodes. But one of the things we talked about in retro is like, hey, is the retro actually doing anything? Like, do we really need this, right? Is the retro a necessary component of this? Because we've been here for, I mean, at that time, it was like a few years. After a few years, we're pretty much agreeing with everything. We've trimmed all the fat. We don't have anything left to talk about. So we moved the retro to be like a quarterly retro. Like, hey, we don't need to make this rote discussion part of our process.
If you haven't fixed it, talking about it every 2 weeks if you have fixed it, talking about it every 2 weeks is pointless.
And then trying to get people to come up with things.
No, you don't have to. I don't have to come up with something, right?
Yeah. So I don't know how we went down this little rabbit hole, but
whenever
you bring up Agile, lately I've gotten more and more animated about the way that I've seen it practiced for the last 15 years.
The way I always the way I learned to approach leadership or leading from within, being the person you want to see, like, work with you, like be the guy that's cool to work with, be the guy that's working hard, be the guy that's serving the team, coming in with that attitude and not the in charge attitude. Like, we're facilitating, making sure we have discussions, we're making sure the boxes are checked, like we're I'm the guy that they're going to be talking to about all these things. And I have the responsibility as the lead. If I'm the lead, it's on my shoulders. Generally don't like the responsibility of being the official lead because it's easier to help out, do that stuff without having all that. I don't like the pressure.
Shadow lead is an easy position, right?
Yes. Yeah. I like things that are easier because I'm efficient. It's
fewer meetings if you're the shadow lead instead of the full lead, right?
But respect is a big thing, and you build respect. You give what you get what you give. You build respect by respecting everybody else, by helping them out.
Yeah.
I try to drop whatever I'm doing to help people. I try to go out of my way and be as responsive as I can, and that has served me very well because I don't have a lot of stuff that builds up over time, little stuff that frustrates people. There's a lot of reasons for that, but in a leadership role, I don't want this to be a thing that's on a list somewhere that they're waiting for and I'm waiting to do. I want my list as short as possible.
Right.
And I want to solve their problems as quickly as possible. I've had two projects, kind of 2.5, but 2 projects where I was the lead of a group of people.
Yep.
And the first one I ever did was a struggle for me. And I had high standards of the deliverables. And so, when it's like, I want this to be, I have better in my mind, but I wanted this to be different. Like I want to take what you did and I want to polish it up a little bit. And I don't think people, that really doesn't go over well. Like, I got to redo what you did doesn't go over well. People don't like that.
I was going to ask, Chad, do you face that thing on your team? Do you ever have that where you've got I wouldn't have done it that way. Do you have also we shouldn't do it this way and I need to redo this because it's wrong? Do you face that at all?
Yeah, but that's part of our iterative process more than
you're iterating your way to that.
Yeah.
You don't find yourself cleaning up some junior person's code or writing comments in the pull request that, hey, how about you put this code in there instead?
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I missed something. Yeah. So we've had plenty of that, right? Like I guess, so I'm super blessed. Like the team that I'm working with, they're amazing. Right. Almost everybody is amazing. They're all contributing at such a high level. It's kind of ridiculous. And so I don't have to be pedantic about, I used to be pedantic about like variable names, right? Like, hey, nobody knows what this means, right?
Right.
Or the separation of concerns was also a thing, right? Like, hey, there's a service layer, man. Don't do that in your controller, right? Like I used to be hyper pedantic about that stuff. I don't have to be we don't have those issues here. I look for them still, right? And I hope that I find something sometime somewhere. Back to the base core principle of Agile, working code is the best sign of progress. And not that I'm ignoring, obvious kludges to get something into production, but
right.
If it works, it works, man. And I'm working with a lot of folks from SDG and consultants from other consultancies, and we've just had an awesome team for last few years, and I haven't had to do that stuff. Now I've had to do that stuff on previous assignments. And it's like you said, usually it's junior developers. You get a lot of that with offshore developers where like
something wasn't communicated clearly.
Yeah, you didn't communicate. Something wasn't communicated clearly, or the time zone difference. Like they try to get something through, so you don't have the consistent communication throughout the day where they're like, hey, can I call you really quick to ask you about something? They'll just code something up and throw the PR out there, and then it's one of my issues with offshore is mostly the geographical differences and the time zone differences, not the quality of the people or the quality of the code. It's just I'm not able to have a conversation with folks throughout the day. Every conversation is on a tape delay by 12 hours.
Yeah,
and at least
and you'd have the same problem with somebody working in the office that came in on a night shift, right? That you wouldn't.
I would have that same. Well, yeah. Previously, I had that same issue with people that worked in Seattle. I had I was on a gig. We had people in Seattle, and the time zone shift. It's almost the same problem as offshore. Like they're 2-3 hours ahead, and so you automatically lose hours during the day because lunch hours are different. You lose start times are different. Like it's a challenge.
Yeah,
It is.
I worked
It is
with
a special.
folks.
Yeah.
I worked with folks over the holidays that were in Amsterdam on a fixed time boxed project, and so I got up at 4 a.m.
As you
every
normally
morning,
do, right?
as I
Kyle,
do.
you're a super early riser, as I recall.
I just fly out of bed with a smile on my face and greet the morning with a song. No, it's just that's when they're there, and when we're meeting with Indonesia and Brazil and Cote d'Ivoire, and that's an interesting scheduling conundrum. And that was like a 2 a.m. wake up. But what was kind of nice is then you have a big chunk of time to yourself. It's like sleep. Yeah, but it's I don't know where I was going with that, but it's a challenge. But you gotta. That's the plate you're stepping up to. Like,
yeah.
That's the job.
That's leadership, right? So back to your part where you were talking about having to sort of clean up work and things like that. Did you get that resolved, or did you find yourself having to do that always?
It normally collaborative, normally, the Chad method.
Yep.
This was a particular situation. I read that book, The Chad Method.
The Chad Method.
It's like he dedicated it to me and he didn't even know me yet.
Don't bring that to work with you. The cover is absolutely not safe for work.
So yeah, that was a unique, difficult situation that had other things involved. And to a point, I'll just redo it and get it done and not make it a thing and just be like, okay, I'll take it from here. It's good. This is a great start. Thank you for your help. Right. I'm going to make a few changes.
You might not recognize it when I get done.
Make just a few changes and clean a few things up. And if you want to check it out, then great. And yeah. And the way I say it now is appearing probably 5 times better than I actually handled it. Because it was a really tricky, difficult situation. It was a people situation. And
was part of it also time constrained? Was that another part of it?
Yeah. There was a lot of pressure on, because that was another time box deal over the holidays, which has just been a recurring gift that I've received as a consultant. Christmas for you.
Why did you stop consulting? You wanted to see Santa Claus?
I saw an opportunity for a role that I thought I would really fit well with and want to do, and work with a really fun customer.
Yeah.
So I'm an internal consultant.
Right. I'm your customer.
And then other tasks as assigned.
As assigned.
One thing I think is important to becoming a leadership is to be a good, I don't want to call it servant, but be a good person that is under a leader. Get good at that part of it. So be a good servant to be a good leader. If you can't serve, how are you going to lead?
Okay.
You have to as a leader, have that experience, be willing or have been willing to understand that role. I want respect. I want to lead. I want to be treated well. But as a follower, I was horrible. I just don't. I think that's important to have that experience. Chad, help me out here.
I think part of it too is it's hard to be in a leadership role, leading people who do jobs that you don't understand, right?
Right.
I think shows like The Undercover Boss are stupid, right?
Yeah,
I hate that show. But
unless the one with on SNL with Kylo Ren.
Adam Driver.
Seen that?
Yeah,
Adam Driver.
Cool. But
that was hilarious.
It was hilarious. You do need to understand what people's day-to-day looks like in order to effectively lead them. And I think some of these automatically comes into play. If I would never try to be a leader around, I don't know. I'm really good at tech leadership. Back when right after high school, I worked at a casino. I was really good at that, right? And I could be an effective leader in those situations. To try to influence and lead people whose jobs you have never done before. I'm thinking of did you guys watch Band of Brothers?
No, but I've heard of it.
All right. So in a couple of situations, they would bring in lieutenants from West Point at the end of the series and say, hey, we're going to take you, we're going to let you go out with a squad on what was the one with Colin Hanks? They sent him out on the mission to cross the river and go get the hostages, bring them back, right? And he's like, oh my God, like, you know, he went out there, and to see that all the people he's supposed to be leading actually doing their job was a transformative experience for him, as opposed to the episode earlier where they had, I forget what the captain's name was. It was right after the Bastogne episode, right? They had to take the town of Foy, and they put this West Point guy in charge of Easy Company, and he just failed completely, right? And I think that those examples translate. We are handling real life scenarios that leadership roles maybe don't understand unless they've been in them.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you have to, what you were saying earlier, Kyle, was in order to lead, you have to know how to serve. I'd change it and say, like, in order to lead, you have to know what a guy's day-to-day is.
Right.
In order to be an effective leader for that person, you have to be able to adapt to whatever that is.
Yeah.
And then if you don't know, if you don't know what they're doing, you need to be a leader and find out what they're doing, right? Oftentimes it's been said where, you know, somebody sits in a cube, does a thing, nobody knows what they do. As a leader, you need to find out what they do. Are they playing solitaire, or are they fixing the production database 27 times a day when data errors happen because of bad code somewhere else? You know, those are different people and different things, but you need to know what they're doing.
Yeah. Applebee's, their management program, like, would start with you working every position: cooking, working the fry side, working the grill, hosting, serving, prep, all that stuff. You have to know how to do all of it. And they don't just do it once. Like, you're in there doing that stuff frequently to learn all those positions. And I think that's great. I don't think that's possible in the tech world. Like,
a little more challenging to go be a DBA and also a tech arc and other things, but you do have to wear those hats.
You do. And I think understanding at least what their role is, what their job is, and then respecting them as the person that plays in that space. Yeah.
First Lieutenant Norman Dyke. That wasn't a captain, it was a lieutenant in charge of Easy Company.
I was surprised that a captain was coming out of West Point, but I don't know much.
Yeah, I know nothing about it.
My bad. First Lieutenant Norman Dyke, tried to take the town of Foy, failed to advance because he'd never anything like what the requirements of the job that he was leading were like.
He had the theoreticals, none of the practice, and he wasn't able to translate that very well. He wasn't able to say, hey, you need to do this task, and we failed at it, and now I don't know what to do, right?
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
How are you with watching other people lead, doing it poorly, like making mistakes as leaders? Watching a guy dress someone down kind of in a public setting, at a high volume with profanities, that's kind of not cool. Like,
I was in
how do you deal with stuff like that?
I was being dressed down at the time.
I don't know that I've ever, I've been in situations where I've worked for folks or with folks in leadership roles. And I mean, I've had chairs thrown at me before.
Nice.
I know, right?
I see that happening with you frequently.
The one commonality between, so I've had chairs thrown at me, I've had papers thrown at me, I've had a lot of things thrown at me. This is more
you've
than
had beers bought for you.
I've had beers bought for me. Yes, that's nicer. But I mean, that's not make believe. That stuff has absolutely happened. And when you see these adult temper tantrums play out like that, they're always correlated to short tenures, right? Like that happens, and then that person and not because of an HR involvement or anything else. It's just the minute. This sounds overly obvious, but the minute you throw a chair at a guy, you're probably not going to have much respect or extra effort or anything from that individual going forward.
Or the rest of the team or anybody that saw it, right? They all see that you've sort of lost your mind and lost your way about how you're doing something. And
so to a much lesser degree, dressing somebody down in a meeting or getting into a loud argument during a meeting or even publicly debating somebody unprofessionally on like Slack or a medium that everybody can see.
Yeah.
Don't do it. I mean, what are you trying to accomplish?
Right.
You drive a big truck and you dress people down, and we all know what that is. All right.
Yeah.
Figure out a different way. That's just horrible leadership.
Same management style, but it's not a good one.
It's a
or
management style
successful
that I think died off in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've seen a lot of that anymore. I have, on the other hand, seen, we don't usually talk about our customers on this, but I'm working for my client I'm at right now. I don't know if it's a specific training they go through or what, but the leadership that we have, I'm talking director level, VP level, senior VP level. I've actually been fortunate enough to interact with these people on hours and off hours and in between hours. And the level of service that they provide the people that, don't just directly report to them, but like 2 levels down on the org chart. It's amazing. It's really cool to see, right? Like I've been invited to happy hour. They're constantly, hey, do you need a drink? Do you need a whatever, right?
Yeah.
I've flown with them, and they're always the people that get up and, hey, let me grab you something, right? You want a snack? You good? Around the office, they swing by once in a while, and like they are such an extreme example of leadership roles that I haven't seen this at a lot of other companies. I have seen this at Target before, and then I used to be an employee at Target, but I've seen it for my current customer too, where their leaders are constantly around employees, constantly doing tiny little acts of service for employees.
Yeah.
And interacting with the people that are providing the results they're looking for on projects and products and day to day.
Yeah.
In a way that it's awesome. I think I've talked before about the CIO at Target. This was 06, 07 when I was going through my adoption process. And I think the fellow's name was Paul Singer, if I remember right. Somehow the CIO at Target, and Target has an IT organization that is, I think at the time, like 1,500 people.
Right.
The CIO of Target knew that I was adopting and would actually swing by and say, hey, how's that going? Where are you at? Because he had done it before. That kind of stuff like really, really matters. It was difficult for me to leave Target at the time because of how wonderful the interactions with their leadership is. And it's going to be really rough for me to leave the client I'm at right now because their leadership is so interactive and good at what they're doing.
And hands-on in a way that's not micromanaging and anything like that. They're keeping an open communication channel, making it very easy for you to talk to them about any problems you might have or things that they can help with.
And they're present, right? And they make their presence known, which is, they're not just on a different floor hiding in an office with the door closed constantly. Yes, these people are constantly in meetings. But they're not, when they're not, they're interacting with the people who they're, who are working for them. And it's great. I love that aspect of where I'm at.
And it really does tie back to Kyle, where, being able to serve someone first to be able to serve them as their leader later on.
Yeah, and that's maybe what I was kind of trying to get to is the servant leadership, like you're still serving. People look at the org charts as a hierarchy of power with the people on the bottom and all of that. It's like, no, that needs to flip over on its head. And this guy is responsible for everybody above and taking care of the next level and the next level. And it's all riding on that guy that's at the top, but he's the one that needs to make sure that everybody has what they need. And when you see that guy grab the plunger because the toilet's clogged and not hand it to somebody else, but just go take care of it, that's meaningful. Like, okay, no job's too big. This guy's no job's too small, and they're willing to do what it takes to get it done and get their hands dirty and be in the trenches with everybody else. And when you see that, you respect it. And I think that another part that I think is really important is ownership. And as a leader, taking ownership for things, like a bad situation happens and there's like, well, did you give clearance? Taking that first step of going, did I give them clear enough instructions? Did I give them enough time? Did I give them the right stuff to do that was within their capabilities? It's like looking back on yourself instead of blaming them for not doing things the way you wanted them to do it, but taking that ownership on first, that helps a lot. I found that that's in everything.
And that's a good way to work yourself into a leadership role too, right? From just a regular team person is taking ownership and responsibility for the success and the failures that you've taken ownership on.
Yeah.
I think in my career, it's been weird. A lot of my experiences have been bookended by bad ones, right? So I'm at a place and it's amazing. And then I go to a place and it's like, I got to dodge chairs now, or this woman, this director is going to, she's going to throw a stack of papers at me, or,
right.
And then I'm going to go to another place and I'm going to meet a bunch of wonderful, leaders. And then, it is weird. I've got this sawtooth pattern of, but yeah, I think to the original topic that we were talking about, what was the original, what is the title of our podcast, Kyle? It's,
being anointed a leader, or, becoming a leader.
Yeah. As a consultant.
As a consultant.
We haven't really talked about working back and being a leader in order to leave a client. And I don't know that you necessarily have to work it back too much.
There needs to be a clear handoff and transition, though.
Yeah. There needs to be training. I mean, if we've done our job right, if we've been really good at building products and writing maintainable code and obeying client standards and everything else and practices and documenting all of our exceptions that we've been able to influence, kind of moonwalking out the door at the end of an engagement should be almost a non-event, right? Like
ideally, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I guess to your point, it's like, okay, once the crew has built the house, they don't need to train everybody on how to be a plumber, a construction worker, or even a general contractor on the way out. Your house is built and you just need to know how to live in it.
Right. I don't want my plumber to live in my basement.
You don't want your plumbing to require somebody that's a plumber 24/7.
Yeah.
Right. So I think backing out of de-escalating yourself from a leadership role to just, hey, call me if there's a problem. Like my biggest goal is, to leave a place, call me if there's a problem. Right. I hope to God you don't call me because if there's a problem, then I screwed up when I was there.
And if you're going to call me right away when I remember what I actually did, rather than a year later when I don't really remember exactly what I did.
Yeah,
I always just like to know how it's going. Like, that's what I like. Man, I wish I knew how they were doing with the thing I built. And sometimes you run into people and you can ask them, but generally I don't reach out.
No.
And some places have a interest in not telling if it was good or bad, or for whatever reason, they don't want to answer that question. So I stopped asking a long time ago. But if they volunteer it, or if I run into something and it comes up in conversation, and then it's nice to hear that, that thing you built has been working for them for 10 years. And
that's my favorite.
It's they still like it. It's gone through 3 migrations, without a problem. It's like, I did it. I made something good. And that's kind of what I really care about. That's my parting thought.
I will say this, that becoming a leader and then becoming an unleader on the way out require sort of some excellent people skills, not stepping on toes, not giving things to the wrong folks, getting that moonwalk out the back door by having things documented and things like that. It's hard, but you can be successful at it.
I will just say, I don't know that I've ever left. So I've left companies for a handful of reasons. Early on in my career, I bounced around because Obamacare hadn't been passed before, and I needed to reset my health insurance meter, right? It used to be lifetime max of $1 million. And every time baby girl needed a heart surgery, we racked that up. Anyway, that's beside the point. Since I haven't had to do that, I've never left a company for more money. I've always left it because of poor leadership. In poor leadership, as I'm, my perception of leadership, right? And you don't necessarily know that you're leaving poor leadership for better leadership, because that's not something you can really discern from an interview. You can certainly try to get that out of interviewers, but
Right.
that's been the impetus for me to leave places frequently. Is I don't need more money. I'm good. I would love to work for engaged, involved, invested leaders that care and that are present and that fulfill just basic, well, no, I don't want to say just basic. I want them to go above and beyond.
Above and beyond, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to emulate that for the teams that I'm invariably led to lead myself, right? I want to be able, I want to see a reflection of what I do in, other leadership roles.
Yeah. Well, and there's leadership and then there's management. And
it's not, in my
as
book,
an
it's not much
FTE,
different, right?
well, it's not, but the management is a hat. Leadership is something you do.
If I've got a manager that's a horrible leader, I have a horrible manager. So, yeah.
Yeah. But if you have a leader that's a horrible leader, they're not necessarily a manager.
All right. I want to give a new parting
The
thought.
law of transitive properties.
A new
The
parting
transitive
thought.
property of terribleness is
A new parting thought is it's not hard to do leadership well, but it's very easy to do it poorly.
holy crap. We should stop recording right now. That was perfect.
All right. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.
See you guys.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Chad. See ya. I'm staying on.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.